Hello and welcome to part 2 of my interview with Nigel Talbot-Rice. When Nigel listened to the recording of our first conversation, he felt that there were one or two areas that he wanted to expand upon. So when he was next in London, he invited me round to the same hotel to go over those areas and to talk about a few new areas as well. So I suppose this is my first experiment with a sort of bonus excerpt for very loyal listeners or big fans of Summerfield's and Mr. Talbot-Rice. But I hope you enjoy it. We cover some familiar ground. We cover discipline, the concept of boarding for under 13-year-olds, some single-sex versus co-education. But we also cover chapel in a bit more detail and talk about class, which I think is one of the more interesting parts of this half an hour extra session. As ever, do let me know any thoughts, and if you have other suggestions for people I can interview, do get in touch. Thanks very much. Bye. Thanks. Bye. These days, it seems like school culture is more liberal, and that it's quite rare to come across a really strict school. The Summerfields of your day, was it stricter than others? Probably.
I don't think it was a really strict school.
No.
I think it was an orderly school,
Yeah.
if you follow me.
Yeah.
I think I'm a fairly orderly person, and despite sometimes my desk looking terribly untidy, I was reasonably tidy with my desk. And I think my whole running of the school was done in such a way as there was sort of law and order to it. You know, that was with the staff and so on, and then when staff misbehaved, I got pretty irritated with them.
Why is that important for boys to have an orderly environment to grow up in?
Well, I think it's more settled for them, really. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. They like to know where they are. We all like to know where we are, but particularly young people. And I think having clear guidelines, and we talked about the school rules before, and actually, I think at the end of my day, we didn't have any listed school rules. It was common sense, you know, and if they stepped out of line, it was clear that they were stepping out of line. There weren't, you know, you didn't have, oh, right, it says Rule 32B says this. No. So and I think we gradually got a culture in the school which came over the years, because 22 years is quite a long time.
Do you think justice is a more important virtue in the school than mercy?
No, I think both are important. I think, you know, I think justice is probably, well, I'm not sure about it was justice, but no, I think you've got to combine. It's no good if you're overly merciful. Then again, they don't know where they stand.
Is there ever a danger? I think some more progressive educators would say that a too orderly environment might stifle or suppress creativity.
Well, I don't think, was your creativity stifled at all?
I think it was.
I don't think it was. No, I mean, I think that I won't say that's a load of nonsense. Of course, if you've got too strong a set of whatever structure, then yes, it could do that. But I think that's the progressives sort of making excuse for their sort of waftiness, or however you describe it. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that you didn't want any arbitrary rules, that every rule had to issue from common sense in some way.
Yeah, basically that. Yeah. It became that. One of the things I found hardest was when a boy had said that he hadn't done something, and something, say, quite serious, and eventually one persuaded him to speak the truth. And at that stage, you know, I felt, well, actually, you know, he's had to admit that he has been lying and lying and lying, and he has, and I would be very inclined in those cases to make the punishment fairly lenient, because it helped with. I can remember one or two particular boys who had that situation. They'd done something wrong, and something quite serious may have been. I can remember the name of a boy, but I can't remember exactly what he'd done. So it was, forgive the 80-year-old brain.
Of course,
memory.
of course. I'm interested, we talked in the last interview a little bit about chapel and how what we've just been talking about, discipline, there may be some crossover. I'm thinking that in the Victorian age, it seemed that often schoolmasters had a view of children as sort of inherently wicked
Yes.
or evil,
Yeah,
and that they needed school to sort of iron
beaten
that out
of them. Yeah.
It sounds like by the time we get to the late 20th century, that's gone. And do you think the boys under your charge were inherently good, but just needed structure to bring out that goodness? Or?
I think that inherently, for most of them, yes. But there's always some no names, rotten eggs, and you try jolly hard, and you give them. I had one particular boy who I'd taken him on duty as he was causing problems in all areas, and I rarely gave him quite a bit of time and whatever, but it didn't work. I remember the parents saying when I told them they had to take him away, he said, well, you've done all you really have done. They then took him to an educational psychologist who said it was all the school's fault that he was.
Right.
But that's what an educational psychologist is earning his fees for, to say what the parents want to hear. But it was interesting how they completely turned after hearing him.
Can a school make up for an unhappy home?
I think it can, particularly a boarding school where they're away, but not. It can't eradicate the damage done. There's no doubt that a broken home, well, not in all cases, but in quite a number of cases, it does affect the boy. One or two very badly, others not so. Some would, I think, take it as a mature attitude, as a sort of fact of life. Okay, Dad and Mum have split up, but it again depended on how the parents approached the issue, and if it was very one-sided, one side wanted the divorce and the other didn't really, that made it harder, and the child felt split.
Did you see parents' lifestyles change over the time that you were ahead, such that not necessarily divorce, but maybe they didn't enforce bedtimes, or all the sort of slightly more liberal parenting styles? So
it's difficult to know, funny enough, because school is school and holidays are holidays, and you don't really inquire too much as to what they're doing in the holidays. So obviously in the holidays they would be more lenient on bedtimes than at school, because you had to have get them to bed reasonable time, otherwise it wrecks the next day, well, over a period of time. And lifestyles, gosh.
I mean, it's often said these days, somewhat casually, parents are trying to be their children's best friends.
Yeah, I think that, I don't think that was necessarily the case between 75 and 97, which is when we're talking about for me. But I noticed this, with friends' children or grandchildren.
What do you fear to be the consequences of that?
Well, if they're overindulged, it will not be good. But I don't think it's probably the richest who are, in a way, sometimes not good parents because they got a nanny, they're away, jet-setting around the place or whatever. And then parenthood is letting the child down in the long term. But I don't think we had too much. Well, I can't think of serious. There all obviously were parents who spoilt their sons more than others did. But
did you ever feel like you were in a position to actually take a parent to one side and say, I feel like you perhaps are spoiling this boy a little bit too much, or to ever pass comment on parenting?
Well, I can't remember doing that, which is terrible. No, I don't think I did.
Yeah.
That's where the tutor system was quite useful, because it wasn't involving the headmaster.
Delegate.
So that, if we as staff felt what you said about a certain boy was correct, that the parents needed a word, I would delegate that to the tutor, because that relationship was much more, or it developed into more a friendship, or could do, rather than having the head coming down, you know, which might make the issue slightly worse, or could do. Yeah.
You mentioned rich or spoilt children. One of the bit of a silly question perhaps, but one of the questions I was thinking about was about class, and a few of my friends from the school remember that the kids that walked through the middle of the school, who I think were at the local state school, there was often an adversarial culture.
Oh, who walked
down the
footpath.
The footpath, exactly. And there were words exchanged between the two things, and it almost reinforced, maybe in a sense that too many of us had, that of class distinction. Did class play any
Now
role?
that is quite, you know, it didn't with me. I mean, we had some day boys who were certainly not, they didn't come straight from the state school. Oh, they would have actually from primary school, some of them. I think it's true to say that the boys from Charles School going up the footpath used to be much more antagonistic, and there used to be much more an exchange in my early days when I went in the 60s, 65 onwards. Sometimes you had more problems. I don't remember it, so it interests me that you raised it then, that because you were towards the latter part of my time. Did you notice it, or just?
I do. I remember it. There was a slight sense of menace that
you
felt
be,
you were only
yes.
9 or 10 years old, and that they were often much bigger and scarier. But more than anything, I suppose, not completely conscious of it then, but you're at a boarding school, and maybe it just that the self identification as being of a different class from these people, or different.
I think that's true. Yeah. It was a fact of life that they were, and there wasn't. You know, one couldn't have a sort of meeting on the pathway. But there were not issues. There used to be issues that we had to deal with more seriously. But I don't remember those. I mean, I think you would be going across the pathway to the further fields.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But these days, I'd say, given that at least the attitude of society is to try and be as levelling as possible, do you think that's a sort of a healthy attitude to come out?
I think it's become a better setup. Originally, when I go back to the 60s, it was the secondary modern school, and so they were the failed grammar. For much of my headmastership, it had become comprehensive. So you had the elements of troublemakers, but a better atmosphere generally, I think. But I don't know actually what one could do, because it would tend to come from them.
Yes.
Or at least that's how I heard. Otherwise I'd have been very cross if our boys were stirring them up.
You're not sure of how aware you are of these trends, but there's a lot of pressure on independent schools now to form partnerships with local state schools and to share facilities and whatnot.
I'm all for that. Yeah, I really am, and I don't know if Summerfields is doing anything in that school. It's certainly happened at the public school level more than the prep school, but I think the prep schools will be going into that, and certainly Summerfields ought to do it. I don't know the local primary school. Charvel is from 11, so it could be, they're a very good thing. And also, with the public schools, they are sharing some of their teaching skills.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And facilities.
Nothing but good for that.
Yeah. One question that an old Summerfieldian particularly wanted to ask was about crazes.
Crazes?
Yeah, and they seem such a feature of prep school life that suddenly out of nowhere, these fascinations take hold of the pupil body. They become all entranced by particular...
Yes, it's an extraordinary phenomenon, but it did happen. I remember it happened with me at Charterhouse. I don't know if you've come across the game, I forget what it's called, where you have a ball, you have to get it from the beginning through past 60 holes to the end.
Yeah.
and you had two handles, one there and one there. And I had that for a Christmas present back in the 50s and took it back to school. And it was everybody begging to borrow it. Nobody else seemed to have one.
It was the iPhone of its day, was it? The iPad.
But
yeah.
I think there were crazes, they'd come and go. Some old ones, the yo-yo used to be a craze, and then it would go, and then it would come back, and everybody would yo-yo. Conkers for a bit. What were the crazes in your day?
Pogs. Do you remember them?
No.
Very strange.
Oh, cards.
Circular discs.
Oh, no, I don't know.
Which had little monsters on, and they're very expensive. And you could buy packs of 4 or 8, and then you would play your Pogs against someone else's, where you put them in a stack and hit them, and no matter which side they fell on. And of course, football stickers was the other big one as well.
That's the one, yes. Yeah. Football stickers and others.
Yeah, Conquest.
And I suppose nowadays, and I don't know what the setup is at Summerfields with mobile phones.
Yeah, well, let's go on to that. They've been in the press a lot in the last few weeks.
Oh, they're appalling.
Whether schools should ban them.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, it was bad enough having the phone thrust upon us. I mean, this sounds really 19th century. But we were one of the guinea pig schools. Adrian Richardson at Cot Hill refused to allow a telephone. He eventually
Was that done from parent pressure more than boys' pressure?
Well, with us, it was done through social services because they asked us to sort of cooperate with them.
Wow.
So we installed the telephone. Some parents were not pleased to have it.
Why?
Oh, because they found that it would upset their son talking to mum. It was not talking to dad. And there were always a little group of boys queuing outside the telephone box in the passageway when I came over in the morning. And I think that they often would, no, not often, but sometimes they'd come out looking much more miserable than when they went in. No, you move with the times, and I don't know what the school's attitude is now, whether they have mobile phones.
Most boarding schools ban mobiles in the day, but allow them in a boarding house so that you can communicate with your parents, particularly if they're overseas.
Yes. I just don't know what... I would have resisted that for as long as I could, if you follow me.
Absolutely.
And I see that, I understand the sense of it, and it
So do you think that a boarding community should be a sort of hermetically sealed world that exists? I mean, in a positive sense, or at least its own
No, I don't.
community?
Actually. No, but because, I mean, that puts you into a sort of glass ball.
But what you're saying does ring true, that if you allow children to be in touch with their parents a lot, then the homesickness perhaps increases.
It can do.
Yeah.
I mean, with some, it was just straightforward. Mum liked to hear them, and the child was perfectly sensible about it.
Yeah.
But there were definitely others who rang home, almost daily, and I think the mothers or the fathers would have preferred them not to. We sent you to boarding school, and
we don't want to see you.
We'll see you in a week's time. It's not. It was different from the olden days. No.
There was a rather cruelly short egg timer, so I seem to remember you could only speak for 5 minutes or so anyway because there was a queue. Yeah.
Oh, I had forgotten that. Yeah.
So actually, it was almost more emotionally distressing because just as your mother had asked you a question, the timer would go.
If it was 5 minutes, that's pretty long. But I don't remember that.
I can't remember how long it was.
Whether that came in with Robin.
No, I think it was there on you.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you only had 1 year with Robin.
That's right.
Yeah.
98.
Right. So all your evil thoughts come from 4 years with me. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good time to ask about boarding for under 13s. I mean, it just seems to be ever less popular. Can you ever see it making a research? Maybe I can phrase it like this: are there some merits which could be rediscovered, which actually people are just...
I think it's, as I said in the earlier part of this, I think parents, mothers in particular, and I quoted what I would say to mothers rather than fathers, you need to be unselfish to send your boy here with everything that's going on. I've got a grandson who is due to go to Summerfields, and they've put off going for another year now And, you know, my daughter in London is not beside herself with all the things, but she has so much to do, taking him to extra this and extra that football and so on. And he's at a proper prep school in London. I think it became unfashionable. Well, it began to become unfashionable in the 80s, but as I told you in the earlier part of this interview, I was turning away 8-year-olds in 1997 and would have gone on doing that, I think. But that was, I think, because Summerfields had the right publicity or whatever, parental word of mouth. And we had, of course, with bringing in double credits and that sort of thing, we had made it more accessible for parents. But if you're going to make the most of boarding school, you need to have a lot of things on offer at school, and you need to be able to use those. If you have a lot of things on offer, and parents are taking them out to either sit in a pub or a hotel or going home and, you know, playing on their computer, actually they're missing out. I think it was, you know, mothers saying, "Oh, you couldn't possibly send your son away, could you?" And, you know, it was, mothers were made to sort of feel guilty that they were doing just that. I mean, I don't know your mother in her situation. Was it your father who pushed for you to go to eight-year-old?
I'm not sure about push, but it was definitely there. You had to be, amongst her group of friends, you almost had to be quite brave not to do it at that particular stage.
Yeah.
So even against their better feeling, if not their better judgment, I know my mother says now that she sort of wouldn't do it now if she had the chance again, because it now feels again very young to have done it. But back then, all of her friends did it, and they did it gladly, and they were hugely appreciative of what they got in return.
Now, I'm interviewing you for a moment. Do you feel it harmed you in any way that you left home fortnightly to go to a boarding school at the age of 8?
Personally, not at all, no.
Your brother?
No. I think what we both agree on is that it made home feel even more wonderful.
That's what so many people say, that you know, they really appreciated their home more than if they were just going daily back and forth. So that's good.
Enriched the sense that home was a place of sheer fun and really sort of strong emotional appeal to it. And school was often very fun as well, but it was where you did your work and got on with things. So
school was school. And you're not emotionally retarded because you were sent off at 8?
I don't believe so, but you never know. I've certainly been accused of it. But and interestingly, there's a certain group of friends, but there's certainly an analysis out there which often pops up in The Guardian that, I'll crudely put it, that sort of Britain has been run for the last 100 plus years by a generation of men on the whole, white men on the whole, who went to boarding schools from a very young age and have led the country in a way that reflects their sort of emotionally bankrupt childhood, because they are rather cruel, rather unfeeling, over sense of duty and an under sense of feeling that all stems from boarding from a young age. Your initial reaction to such a...
I mean, I think that's I think if you went back, what do we know, 100 years and so on, but I think in the latter part of the 20th century, that's a load of nonsense. I really do. I mean, I don't think any of people that the boys that I educated have suffered from it in really in any way. I don't... There may be some who say now, "Oh yes, I was emotionally retarded because of that." But I can see in the sort of first part of the first half or more, because I was sent off to boarding school aged 8 in 1946, and one saw one's parents. You just went out for the day on a Sunday once before half term, and there wasn't a half term like this we have now. I mean, and then once in the second half of the term. and you didn't get, I would say to my bed, this is the last time I'm sleeping in you for 13 weeks.
Yeah.
You know that. So you know, that was quite different. So yeah, I mean, there's an element of truth or whatever in that statement when you're looking backwards. I don't think it's the case in the last 20, 30 years. I don't think our government, whether it was left-wing or right-wing, have no, because quite a lot of the left-wing people have been to public schools.
Yeah. No, I've just been reading Goodbye to All That, which is set at Charterhouse. Well, Graves was at Charterhouse.
Oh yes,
before
yes, he
went
was.
to
Yes,
the
yes,
war.
yeah.
And it sounds so anarchic.
Yes.
The culture there. There's almost no mention of teachers. It's all just, you know, 13-year-old boys coming up and facing these big 18-year-old boys without any mediation on the part.
I
of
was
the
at
parents.
Charterhouse, and actually it was quite a happy school, but I was head of house and I was allowed to cane a boy, which is ridiculous if you think about that, in those days. And the fagging system, it may depend on the house, but in my house the fagging system was not abused at all. You know, but that you're going back with Graves to the 1920s, 8 or earlier.
Earlier, so he left. He went straight into the World War started as he left. So
Oh right,
he
so
left at
yeah,
14,
yeah.
Let me ask the question I also asked him about chapel, and whether there's. I suppose I was particularly interested in. It seemed that you felt like you could have done more with the institution.
I think as I look back, I knew I wanted to change chapel.
Yeah.
And I did. It became certainly a more alive place. But I don't think I got rid of, as I said to you, this ridiculous habit of crossing as they went in or out of chapel. It was what they had picked up from when they first went in as 8-year-olds. And in that, by the way, there is, sorry, turn off a moment. There were areas with hindsight I'd have liked to have been a little bit more insistent on things to the chaplain. Point is, if you have a chaplain, I'm actually like the bishop. The head is like the bishop to the chaplain, so you can actually tell him what to do church-wise. And there were things I didn't like that Fergus wanted to do over
Such as?
Sackcloth and ashes or whatever, you know, covering the cross at Easter time. But that was my upbringing. It just seemed total anathema. No, I don't know how chapel came over to you.
Very central to the life of the school, very regular. But I would say, that the Bible stories have stayed with me, Old Testament and New Testament from there, but probably not that much on maybe the role of conscience, or any of. I think by the end of the school we weren't sort of entered into what the mystery of Christianity might be. It felt most of my friends who've left with a pretty cardboard cutout view of what Christian life is all about, which then probably made it quite easy to reject it in their later teens. That's just other unconsidered comments, but
yes, no, I can see. I think it's difficult. As I say, with hindsight, I think I could have done more with chapel, but exactly what?
But do you think?
But it certainly, it certainly was a great improvement from what I had inherited and what it had been in the old days.
Yeah.
In terms of,
Yeah.
you know, so stuffy and formal and Eucharist, alternate Sundays, as I've said earlier. That you know, it certainly became more lively, and the preaching on the whole, boys listened to.
Yeah.
Whereas they didn't. They used to just sort of
Fiddle.
almost nod off. Yeah.
Maybe we should end, Nigel, with the phrase that you said at the beginning, which was, "I'm glad I retired when I did."
Yeah,
What do you mean
well,
by that?
yeah. I mean, I'd done my time. I went 1 year early because I hoped Mark was going to get it, and he needed to know because he otherwise was going to be putting in for headships. I've been a governor of 5 schools in those 21 years since retiring, and I increasingly found how irritating it was for the head, particularly these documents that you had to, all of that. I don't think the parents would have been any more difficult, because I don't think I would have necessarily become any less, how shall I put it, running a tight ship, I think was what I put before. And, you know, I got on well with parents, and 99% of the parents, or late 90s%, got on well with me.
So the fundamentals of what it is to run a school haven't really changed?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I could run a school now.
Yeah.
Except I haven't got the energy to do it.
But boys are still boys, girls are still girls, parents are still parents.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously co-education is more widely accepted now than it was. There are not so many prep schools that are single sex. Obviously there's Summerfields, there's Ludgrove, Cot Hill, Horace Hill, I think.
For a parent who's listening to this, who's never even heard of the concept of single-sex education, what do you think the best argument for it is?
Well, I think it has been shown that girls do better at A-level when they're on their own. I cannot quote you chapter and verse where that's... And I think those parents whose daughters have gone to single-sex school and decide to go to a sixth form when there are boys, they got to the stage they want boys, they probably don't do quite as well. They've got to adjust to the whole concept of a new school and the fact that it's co-educational.
But what about from 8 to 13 boys? Why should they be educated on their own rather than...
I don't think they need to be.
Right. One of the things that strikes me about, and maybe this is just pure rose-tinted nostalgia, but there was a certain magic to Summerfield's aspects like the League Feast or Mr. Pryor's fishing trips. There was just a balance of eccentricity and magic, but all within this ordered, tight ship.
Yes.
Does that still remain in schools today?
I don't know whether it remains in Summerfields or not. You know, things like the hay feast. I mean, I think Robin wants to get rid of the hay feast, but that was sacrilege. I think that we had these traditions, some of which we built up. The hay feast, sorry, not the hay feast, the League Feast became a much bigger thing. I forget, in my early days, did they have a proper feast? Yes, they must have, but not quite along the same... Come in! Not along the same lines as it was.
That might be quite a good time to end, I imagine.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.